Welcome to this lesson on double entry bookkeeping and creating a trial balance. This is intended to assist you with element P8 of the Unit 11 Accounting Concepts module of the Cambridge Technicals Level 3 course in Business Studies. Double entry bookkeeping is so called because all transactions are recorded twice, once as a credit and once as a debit. The best way to explore this is to work through an example. Let's begin with some initial transactions. So on the 1st of January, an owner invests 5,000 of his own money to set up a gardening business. The owner has a ride-on lawnmower worth £2,000 for business use and gets a £3,000 loan from NatWest as startup cash. What we're going to need to do is we're first of all going to create a ledger which is for the capital that the owner invests, and that's the £5,000 worth of cash. This is our ledger account, and these are sometimes known as T ledgers because of the way they're laid out. We have debits recorded on the left, and we have credits recorded on the right. And in this column, we're going to record the date of the transaction, which was the 1st of April. So let's explain why we've recorded it like this. First of all, why have we recorded it on the credit side? Well, we're recording everything from the perspective of the business, and from the perspective of the business, this £5,000 of the owner's money is actually a liability for the business. It's money that the business owes to the owner, so we record it as a credit. The same is true of the lawnmower. And we record that as a credit as well of 2,000. Now there's another transaction we've still got to record, which is a loan from NatWest Bank. But before we do that, we need to record the other side of these two transactions. And that means we're going to have to set up at least one other ledger to do that. So I've created a ledger called the cash ledger. This is going to record all transactions related to cash. And as we can see, we've recorded the £5,000 owner's capital on the debit side, meaning that that cash has been received by the business. And as you can see, we've now recorded this ledger, this transaction as both a credit and as a debit. Now, you don't need to highlight them when you do it, but I'm just doing it so we can see what we've done. Now, we can't record the lawnmower as cash because it's not cash, it's equipment. So we need to create another ledger to record transactions related to equipment. Again, the business has received this lawnmower, so it appears in the debit side, and the amount is 2,000. And now you can see that we've got this transaction has been recorded twice, once as a credit and once as a debit. So we're good to go there. I'm just going to shade that in so we can see we've done it. Now, we still haven't recorded this bank loan from NatWest, but what we do know is that it's a £3,000 loan, so that's a £3,000 that the business receives, so we can record it in the cash ledger. Again, because the business has received the loan, we record that on the debit side and record the amount thus. But we still need to record the credit side of the transaction because we now have a liability. In fact, we owe £3,000 to NatWest. So we'll set up a new ledger for NatWest loans. So the loan is a liability for the business. In other words, that's money that the business owes. The amount's £3,000 and it has its own ledger, NatWest loans. We've now recorded all of the transactions on both sides of ledgers, and therefore that transaction has been recorded successfully. Now, if we were to do our trial balance at this point, we'd find that it balances nicely because every single transaction has been recorded once on the credit side and once on the debit side. So our next transaction, on the 3rd of January, the owner purchases gardening tools for cash worth £1,450. Now, we don't need to create any additional ledgers here because we already have a ledger for equipment and we already have a ledger for cash. We just need to make sure that we're recording them on the correct side. So here's the transaction as it's been correctly recorded. Firstly, we've spent 1,450 pounds of cash. That has left the business and therefore is recorded on the credit side of the cash ledger. But we've received, in return for that £1,450, tools worth £1,450, so that's recorded as a debit. In other words, the business has received it on the equipment ledger. And those two can be ticked off because we know that they have been recorded on both sides. So our next transaction will require us to create some more ledgers, because on the 4th of January the owner buys a van on credit from RV Vans Limited for £4,000. So they're not paying cash for it, they're actually paying for it, buying it on credit. So we need to have a ledger to record the liability of the amount that we owe of 4,000. So here we're recording the fact that the business owes RV Vans Limited £4,000 for the purchase of the van. And we also need a ledger to record transactions that relate to the van as an asset, and we record that as a debit because the business has received the van. So you can see that we've recorded that transaction as both a credit and a debit. So now we can tick that off. And now on the 7th of January, the owner sells the lawnmower for £1,500 cash. So the business is losing the lawnmower from the equipment ledger, so that must be recorded as a credit for the appropriate amount of 1,500. 7th of January, we sell the mower for 1,500, but we receive in return cash for that sale of 1,500. So we record that in the cash ledger as a debit. Have you spotted the deliberate mistake yet? I've been recording everything here as January and everything else as April. I'll fix that. Yeah, sorry about that confusing little mistake there. However, let's just recap on that last transaction. So on the 7th of April, we sold the mower, which means we lost the mower from our equipment ledger and we sold it for £1,500, and we received the cash for that sale in our cash ledger, and again the same amount. So we can now tick that off and say that we've done it twice. We'll just do a couple more transactions and then we'll move on to the next phase. So on the 1st of May, the business pays £330 cash in part payment of its loan to NatWest and a further £250 cash to RV Vans Limited, again as part of its repayment. Both of these transactions are recorded as credits in the cash ledger because cash is leaving the business. So these are recorded on the credit side of the cash ledger for the appropriate amounts. And as we know, if we record something as a credit, we must also record it as a debit. So the NatWest loan ledger receives the payment of 330, and the RV Vans ledger receives the repayment of 250. And we have now completed all of our transactions. The next stage is to balance each ledger and come up with a final balance for each of the ledgers. We'll quickly use the auto sum feature in Excel to get a subtotal of each side of each ledger. Let's just focus on the equipment ledger, and I'll show you how to do it on this one. So the first thing to do is to look at the ledger, and you can see that the debit side is the highest side, the high side, and the credit side is the low side or short side. So what we'll do is we'll find the difference between these two sides of the ledger, and we'll write the difference on the short side of the ledger and we'll call that balance carried down. So the big side, take away the short side, and we write it on the short side. What we then do is we can work out the totals for both sides. Well, we already know it for the equipment side. It's just the same as the subtotal. And on the short side, we can find that same figure by adding these two figures together. And they match. And then we can use this figure, the balance carried down figure is our balance for the ledger, and we write that on the high side or big side of the ledger, and we call it balance brought down. And that figure is always equal to your balance carried down figure. Okay, so this is the layout we're looking for. The balance carried down will always be on the short side of the ledger. The balance brought down will always be on the high side of the ledger, and it will follow this layout. Let's do that again, but this time we'll do it for the NatWest Loans ledger. So we look at the ledger and we see that the credit side is the high side. So the balance brought down, the balance carried down will be equal to the big side minus the short side. The total will be the subtotal of the short side plus the balance carried down. And it's just the subtotal on the high side. And then the balance brought down is equal to the balance carried down. Now you can see in this example, in the NatWest loans, the balance brought down, the final balance is on the credit side, and on the equipment ledger, the balance brought down is on the debit side. I'll now go ahead and I'll balance the rest of the ledgers. And now, as you can see, all the ledgers have been balanced and we have a balance brought down figure, either credit or debit, for each of the ledgers. Now, it's important to remember that in order to get a pass for P8, not only must you correctly record the transactions and correctly subdivide the ledger, but you must also correctly balance each of the ledgers. Otherwise, you can't get a pass. Now, we're going to use the balance brought down figures for each of the ledgers to do the final part of P8, which is to do the trial balance. So we'll record the debit balances first, and I can use a spreadsheet to link to the balance brought down figure, so there's no chance of me making a typo. So cash, the final balance of the cash ledger was 7470. The final balance of the equipment ledgers was 1950. And the final balance of the van ledger was 4,000. I can now record the debits. Sorry, I mean the credits. The final balance of the NatWest ledger was 2670. The final balance of RV Vans Limited was 3750. And the final balance of our capital ledger was 7,000. Now, if I've done this correctly, the total should match. And there we go. Now, the fact that these balance is only an indication that there's no obvious errors in the account. It does not guarantee that there are no errors in the account, because I could have made the same error on both sides of the ledger. However, if we did have a discrepancy at this point, it would mean we had an accounting error. In a nutshell, that is how to do double entry bookkeeping. Now, these are not the same transactions as in the model assignment. You'll need to check the model assignment for the transactions. I believe that they are in our VLE. Start by creating your ledger subdivisions as appropriate and recording the transactions either as credit or debit. Remember, ledgers are from the point of view of the business. So if we owe money, we record it as a credit. And if we have received funds or assets, we record it as a debit. Once you've done that, you need to balance each of the ledgers to get a final balance brought down for each of the individual ledgers. And finally, you record those balances in the trial balance, and the credits and the debits should equal. I hope you found this tutorial useful. Please contact me via your school email address if you require any help or assistance. Thanks for watching.